Today, how to keep your mirrorless camera's sensor dust spot free while you're traveling, as well as a real simple way for you Nikon mirrorless users, the Z50, the 6, and the 7, to keep that switch from the electronic viewfinder to the back display working perfectly. Well, hey everybody, it's Hudson here. Welcome to Approaching the Scene. Thanks to everyone who's been subscribing, liking, sharing. I'm here in sunny El Sargento on the Sea of Cortez. Got my family and good kiteboarding friends here for a vacay. And we've been having a ton of fun. I've been learning to foil, which is, riding a hydrofoil behind a kite. The kids have been playing in the water and the beach, and it's just been the perfect little vacation break for my family here from the kind of dreary winter of the Pacific Northwest. The wind hasn't quite come up yet today. I think we're gonna go out and do some foiling. It's gonna be a light wind day, but I thought I'd do a quick ATS on mainly some questions that I've had from the community. Above all, I want Approaching the Scene to be community-based and community content driven. I've had a lot of questions from people having trouble with their Nikon Z cameras, switching, the switch from the electronic viewfinder to the back display. Some people are saying, well, the electronic viewfinder isn't coming up unless I hit this little button. There's a button up here where the prism would be on a DSLR that switches the camera from the viewfinder to the back display to auto switching mode. And people are finding, well, auto switching mode doesn't work. It just stays on the back display. Well, it's really, really simple to fix. You just pop your eye cup off. This is my preferred eye cup. It's a cheap buy on Amazon. It's rotatable for left-eyed, right-eyed, vertical orientation. And either it or the stock one, they just slide straight up. You just pull straight up. And there's a little sensor right there. And the important thing is to have, a dust cloth with you. I always have one in my pocket when I'm shooting. A little microfiber cloth. I'll put a link to the eye cup, the microfiber cloth, everything I talk about in this video in the YouTube description. And you just wipe that little sensor off. As long as you have the cup off, you might as well wipe your viewfinder off too. Get it nice and clean, the glass on the back of the eye finder, and then you put your cup back on there and you'll find that all of a sudden your electronic switching is working perfectly again. It's just something to keep in mind as you're cleaning your camera. When you wipe off the back LCD, when you're cleaning lenses, clean that little eye sensor too. That's going to keep it functioning perfectly and properly. I've had people ask me, what do you do with your microfiber claws? How do you take care of those in the field? Well, it's quite simple. I keep a Ziploc full of these straight out of the dryer. I wash and dry them, throw them in a Ziploc in my camera bag, and I use them, and as they start to get dirty and corroded with finger gunk and stuff, I usually keep a Ziploc with just one that I'm using in my camera bag side pocket or in the pocket of my shorts or my pants. As it starts to get dirty, I just throw it loose into my camera bag. When I get home and I unpack, those loose ones go straight into the washer. They come through the dryer. They go back into the bag of clean ones. I promised, having talked about the eye sensor for the Z camera people, to talk a little bit about mirrorless cameras and dust in general. A lot of people that have been switching over to mirrorless are saying, oh my gosh, there are so many more dust spots than I have with the DSLR. And that makes sense. I mean, you pull the lens off of this camera, this is my Z7, and boom, there's the sensor. Every time you're switching lenses, there's no barrier, there's no mirror box, there's nothing in the way to getting dust on that sensor as you're switching, particularly in desert locations like this or alpine environments that are really, really dry. People don't think about the snow and ice being dry, but it's one of the driest environments in the world up in alpine conditions because every bit of moisture is frozen. So you get a lot of dust specks in those conditions. And the best key for me is having these two little pieces of kit. I'm gonna push my, my dusting cloth away here. So the first is a LED loop. It's a magnifying loop. And you can pop the lens off of your camera and have a look for where those pesky dust specks are. I tend to hold my camera upside down, look up into it with the LED light turned on. It's going to show you a magnified view of that sensor. These loops are inexpensive. Again, I'm going to put a link to it right here in the YouTube video. And those links are always on my website and my ATS links page. I'll throw that on there too. So you use the loop, that gives you a targeted idea of where to use your rocket blower on the sensor. And you just turn your camera off. For you Nikon Z users, that locks the sensor in place for cleaning. It locks down that in-body image stabilization system so you can safely clean it with a wet sensor swab if you want. And you just blow your sensor off. I recommend doing it while the camera's held upside down so that dust in the air isn't settling on it once again. And then check it again with the sensor loop. Put your lens back on. I do that pretty much every day that I'm traveling with the mirrorless. Don't let that dust get stuck on your sensor. Just blow it out every day. Have a rocket blower with you. Have a little loop with you. It'll keep it nice and clean. If you have to do wet sensor cleaning on your mirrorless camera, it's actually a whole lot easier than it was in the days of the DSLR. You don't have to open the mirror, lock it up in place, reach way in there to do the wet sensor swab cleaning. Now, for those of you using some of the fancy cameras that have moving sensors that sort of do in-camera, multi-row panoramic capture and that kind of thing, you want to be a little bit careful. You want to read your user manual before you go wet swabbing your sensor. Some of those, I know that some of the Olympus cameras are only to be sent into an authorized service representative to do sensor cleaning because they're on a really sophisticated little suspension system. Luckily for us Nikon users, the minute you turn the camera off, the in-body image stabilization locks down and the sensor can be cleaned. You can get pretty aggressive with it with a wet sensor swab. And it's far easier than the DSLRs because you don't have to reach in as deep. It's an easier swab. It's not hard to do. I have a whole course on that. I'll link that in the YouTube description as well. Just click show more. You're going to get links to all the stuff I've been talking about, plus a link to that short sensor cleaning course, which I should probably update for mirrorless before too very long. But it's the same principles. Nothing has changed. It's just with mirrorless, it's a little bit easier. I show it with DSLR, so just think the difficulty level being a bit simpler. All right, so before I sign off, head down and go swimming with my kids on the beach. I had a couple of questions that have been coming up frequently. One is about printing. I've talked a bit about calibrating your monitor and getting prints to output just like you want them, and that stirred a whole bunch of conversation about papers and paper choices and what kind of papers I prefer. And I think that's a really subjective decision. I think the one thing you have to think about is the biggest choice is between a glossy or luster paper and a matte fine art paper. And I think, you know, the fine art printer who's printing softer tones or black and white may love the look and feel of that fine art matte paper. There are some really beautiful ones. I like some of the textured ones from Hahnemühle, like William Turner and Torchon. But one of the things to note about matte papers, if you're printing vivid landscapes and colors and wildlife, is that they have a lot less dynamic range. It's like a camera sensor of the old with less dynamic range. So they don't have as dark a blacks, they don't have as bright a whites. Your image is gonna look a little toned down when you use one of those matte papers. When you go to softproof, it's gonna look flat on the screen. You're gonna have to boost contrast and work within the limitations of that paper. When you use a modern burrito paper or a fine art pearl paper, one of these lustery semi-gloss papers that are kind of my paper of choice for printing the kind of travel, landscape, wildlife, adventure stuff that I like. I like a lot of color and I like a lot of dynamic range, dark blacks, bright whites, things that are vivid. One of the reasons I love to print on metal is because you get even more dynamic range and color. But I really, really like several papers that I work with, particularly with my Epson printer. I often, if I'm gonna mount, which I do a lot, I mount a lot on Sintra, which is sort of a solid PVC. It's like foam board, but it's solid PVC, so it's very durable and you can just float prints off the wall, or I print on, and I mount to die bond aluminum, which is even sturdier for bigger prints. And no one's going to be feeling that paper. I love Epson's premium luster photo paper. It's a kind of a plasticky feeling paper, but it's really durable. The ink dries very quickly on it, and it's got real deep blacks, real bright brights, and it's just a beautiful looking print. If you want a nicer feel to your print, Ilford's gold fiber silk paper has also just spectacular color range, great durability, good longevity, and a nice hand feel, almost like a fine art paper. Another good one's Hahnemühle's Fine Art Pearl. Those are sort of my papers of choice. So for what it's worth, those are sort of my favorite papers. Those are the big three that I print a lot on. And the other question that I've had a lot recently that I thought I'd just address while I'm in such a beautiful location is this, what is your favorite place to photograph? I get emails all the time, or I meet people when I'm out photographing and they recognize me from these YouTube videos or from my On1 Plus community coaching. And they'll ask, what's your favorite place to shoot? What's your favorite landscape to shoot? And I'm often tempted to kind of repeat what my old mentor Bob Christ said to me back in the day when I asked that question, which is the next place I haven't been. But in truth, there are some places that I return to again and again and again. I love southern Patagonia. I was just down there with a wonderful group of people on a workshop this last year, and it was one of the highlights of my workshop career. It just is such a fantastic place to photograph and to take people. I love the island of Kauai, particularly the North Shore, and I have a fun group of people that we're all heading there in the next couple of weeks. I get home and I basically have a week to turn around, and I'm off to Kauai, and we'll be shooting from the air in helicopters and photographing that North Shore coastline night after night. It's one of the most beautiful islands on earth. When you think of the tropical Hawaiian island, that North Shore of Kauai embodies that with very little development and just some spectacular natural places to photograph, along with Waimea Canyon and the view down into the Hanalei Valley below. It's just spectacular. I love Death Valley. I love the desert Southwest, the whole Moab region, Canyonlands, Arches, Bears Ears. That's why I generally run a workshop down there every single year. This last year I went scouting. I'm going to be doing a fantastic series of workshops this fall with my good friend Rick LePage. We're going to go from Yellowstone in through the Tetons and then down to Moab. Those 3 locations are epic. If you're a wildlife shooter and you like big open country, Yellowstone's really hard to beat. The Tetons for just jagged edged mountains and spectacular wildlife. I mean, the outer rim road, you can stop anywhere and make a beautiful photograph. And then Moab is the quintessential photo location for me in the desert Southwest. The town is great, the locations are easy access from the car, and it's just a wonderful place to shoot. There are some places in Africa that I love too, that I'll be organizing workshops to before very long. I love Ngorongoro Crater and Lake Rabundo Island in Lake Victoria, which is kind of a special spot for me that I really want to organize a workshop to in the next few years with a special crew. So that answers a few of those questions. Feels like the wind is coming up. I think it's time to go pump up a kite and go for a swim in this really beautiful Sea of Cortez with my kiddos. In the meantime, I hope everybody's having a great time out there shooting, whether it's winter where you are, whether it's summer. Just get out there and shoot. That's the whole key to this deal. And keep sending in those questions. Hit the comment sections on YouTube, email me, reach out through any of my social media channels. This whole approaching the scene endeavor is community driven. That's what it's about. That's the way I want it to go. So let me know what you want to hear more about, and I'll oblige. And I hope everybody's having as much fun out there in the world shooting as I am, and we'll see you next week. Thanks.